everyone.
Nobody's here
Hi,
yet.
Laura.
Is there no one there?
No.
Okay, as long as there's no one there, let me know when someone pops up.
Is it worth doing?
It's always worth doing. Florence has tried to read the book. You found it depressing. That's a good start
And
right
look,
there.
I talked to Ann Lewis about it, either end or I can finish it.
Interesting.
Are you online?
Yeah. All right.
Bye.
Hi, online people. All right. So
Okay, look. Hi.
we'll wait for just a couple more people to mosey on in and find safe distance.
Okay. The woman sitting in front of me at church this morning started coughing. And she kept coughing. And I was like, what can I do?
Oh, that's fine.
Just will have a comfy seat.
Yeah, have a comfy seat. So there's plenty of room. All right, so thanks for coming, everyone. Thanks to you who are joining us live on our live stream. This is so fun, truly. Okay, so
You've always wanted to be on television.
I've had my television time. I just have to say, but that's a conversation for another day. So, Pilgrim at Tinker Creek by Annie Dillard. So far I have a couple of reviews of the book. Craig, did you have an opportunity to read the book?
I did, and I just want to mention Betsy will probably be joining us as soon as the thing winds down. Yeah, I'm about halfway through it.
Okay.
So,
And if you have one word to describe it, what's your one word?
well written.
Okay.
However,
You're
can I just
fine.
say one other thing? I'm going beyond my one word limit.
You have a hard time with that one word. One word.
Okay.
No, I'm kidding. Go ahead.
Well, I was struck by the nature, and I guess this is my Eeyore comment, because I said, when was this written? Because all the things about little frogs and creatures and salamanders, I don't see too many of them anymore. But I love the
Yeah.
writing, and I love her, introversion, extroversion kind of counterpoint.
Okay. Joyce,
Depressing.
depressing. Florence,
Let me think one word.
one word.
Without question, impressive.
Mhm.
But as I shared with you a little earlier, I have felt waves of irritation.
Because you want her to get on with it. Is that it? Or-
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and I also couldn't help but think, God, the minutia that she expounds on. I thought, obviously this woman, has genius capacity for, knowing more than an encyclopedia. But God, I'm really walking out on the plank
You're
here.
fine. You
No,
can
you're-
have an opinion.
really
It's all good.
The water's warm.
I'm really walking out.
There's only a couple crocodiles in
No
there.
sharks.
To your point.
But I also
I
thought
cannot
it
believe
lacked,
it was a bestseller.
I also thought it
Really?
lacked humanity.
Yeah.
How about that?
Interesting.
Well, and I think partially
But
maybe why it was a
why-
bestseller and why we read it when we were in seminary, or I read
Mm-hmm.
it, was the writing style, of the minutia, the observational kind of the highly attuned, maybe to a fault, observation style
I mean, I can see
and description.
the point that, God is the universe,
Mhm.
and that universe is both huge
Mm.
and tiny.
Mhm.
And I'm sure that's one of the things she's getting at.
Mhm. So I do think, I remember reading this in seminary and then going to class for the discussion and going, oh. And when I was talking with Allie, I thought, I wonder if we should have the discussion first and then have people read the story. And now I feel like we should have done that, because I feel like if you know what she's trying to get at when you're reading it, it falls into place a little bit better, and you can go with her down that minutia and understand why she's doing that. So,
And not get irritated.
and not get, well, you might still get irritated.
Maybe get less irritated.
Maybe get less. But her whole thing, when she was 16 years old, she wrote another book called Childhood in America. And when she was 16 years old, she was a member of a Presbyterian church, and she asked this question of theodicy, which is why does God allow evil? Or, why do bad things happen to good people type of thing. And she never got a good answer. And so she left the church. And so this is kind of her time spending a year to try to delve into this. And the way she decided to do it was through nature. So because she realized that nature itself is pretty violent, pretty cruel, right? And so she starts you out right from the start with the story about the frog. She's looking at all the frogs jumping around. Yeah, it's in and suck out, right?
Very graphic.
The praying mantis,
It's very graphic.
And then there was the part about the dead horse. Never gonna do that again.
Yeah, and the tomcat coming in her window and leaving the bloody paw prints all over, right? So she kind of sets up for you right at the beginning that nature is cruel and beautiful. And then her second thing that she really wants you to understand is that you have to really look with understanding to comprehend the complexities of the world. So she has this whole she talks, I don't know if you've gotten to the part where she talks about the young blind girl there's a young blind girl who has an operation and she's given sight.
Yeah.
But she doesn't understand what she's seeing because she doesn't understand shadows and items and how that all interplays with itself, right? So she has to be taught how to see. She's saying the same for us. We really, if we're going to understand, we really need to be taught how to see in order to be able to understand. So that's why she goes into that minutia, because she wants you to really see what she's talking about. And
Are you then saying it's like a metaphor for life, how you can look at life?
that's where she ends.
The connection
At the end
between
of the
what she
book.
does as a naturalist. Because at the end of the book, I also kind of fast forwarded to some reviews on her other stuff, because it's included in that edition. And one of the criticisms about her other books is that she tends to kind of almost apparently is self-indulgent and goes in these different tracks and directions, and is it really worth keeping up with her when she does all that stuff?
Well, I
So
mean, she does it.
I think you're spot on. That's a
Because
legitimate criticism.
It isn't all the science.
Right.
Because, I mean, she pulls literature in and philosophy. And,
Yeah.
I mean, the obviously brilliant mind. I'm not
Yeah.
taking anything.
Yeah. And she and Thoreau are good friends. And it's interesting if you read Walden and you read this, like Thoreau makes it seem like he has gone off, into some great expanse when he wrote Walden Pond, like where nobody's around, except Walden Pond, like sits smack in the middle of, the outskirts of Boston.
Right.
And the same with Tinker Creek, like she's having all these observations and yet she's got a big suburban house, like 400 yards from where she's sitting at Tinker Creek. So they have this whole, there's this whole kind of, we're far away, but we're right here. And again, like you can be in the midst of chaos and really stop and look and see. You just have to do it.
And I think there's value too not in fighting against having a superficial faith, a superficial theology, right? And like you're saying, to just not, to not just, just look at the good, just, deal with the simple answers and that type of thing, and to try to get in there and say, there's ugliness too, and in order to have really a holistic, an honest theology, then you want to deal with the whole of the world, and some parts of those things are ugly and are difficult and are challenging, and you don't want to just give those answers, off the hip. You don't want to, you don't want to. I mean, the polar opposite of this is like sloganizing, your religion. Just kind of saying, well, I guess, God, there's a reason for everything, and then you just kind of go off. And so I think there's some value in that. I think which is what I think you brought up, and that's what she's shooting for, really.
Right.
I think that's really interesting, that whole overview that you just said, because I didn't really get it. I was struggling, but and her vocabulary is incredible. I mean, it's just like every other word is, where's my dictionary?
Yeah.
Because she really is brilliant. You can see the brilliance, but I didn't really see the forest through the trees on what you just said,
Right.
Paul. So that's really fascinating.
And there's a line where she says, it's all a matter of keeping my eyes open. But then she goes on to say, because I see what I expect. And what she wants you to do is see what you don't expect, right? So much of the time we go, okay, I'm going to watch the news and I expect to see this. And so that's what I see, or I'm going to do, go visit
Or you choose your source of news.
Yeah. Right,
Yeah.
right, and so that you get exactly what
So
it is
you
you
want to,
expect.
you want to just kind of, just give me what I want to hear, and I'm gonna, I'm gonna put my blinders on.
Yeah.
And they're one click away. I mean, it's really easy
Right.
to choose between.
Right.
Well,
And
and
she
just-
says you can't go into a walk in the woods, while you're thinking about your grocery list, which I think is brilliant. Like, why bother? If all you're doing is processing other stuff, you're missing out on all of what is around you.
I'll say it's interesting, like with meditation. People talk about meditation and how beautiful, it gives you wonderful peace and centeredness and harmony and seeing things as one and all of that. It's all beautiful. Which is kind of true for the beginner parts of meditation. What people are unprepared for and what people don't want to deal with is that when you get into it, there's stuff within your own soul, within your own mind. There's, as they say, the bottom of the pond is, the muck on the bottom of the pond is endless. And so there's stuff that bubbles up as just being a part of humanity. There's this, the 7 deadly sins. And to just repress that, to try to push that away and to only deal with the beautiful. What happens with human beings is we can't just shut down one side of the aperture. When you're dealing with your mind or your heart, reality of the world, if you try to just shut down the bad, uncomfortable parts of the aperture, what happens is they both shut down. And so unknowingly, you're shutting down the heights of joy as well as the bad stuff. And one of the things that we learned through Jesus is that he had, the way I view him is that he had expansive joy, expansive, tremendous love. And I think the reason why he was able to have that just, unbelievable love and connectedness is because he didn't shut anything out. He also didn't shut out, the bad, the grisly, some of which in terms of subject matter, content, intensity, is the same as this, except on a human level. And so as spiritual beings, we want to expand our heart and try to expand the whole aperture. And the more we accept, the more we are open, the more we're open to the good and the bad. And our joys increase along with being willing to go to the depths as well.
Yeah, and I think that one of her points is to see the mystery of life. You have to be able to do that, or to understand the mystery of God. You have to be able.
Yeah.
You have to. She talks about the school of fish. She's standing on the side of the creek and she sees a school of fish, but if she turns just a little bit, the light blinds and she can't see anything. And if she turns the other way, the shadows are so dark that she can't see everything. It just be just right to be able to see the school of fish, right? And that's the mystery of God as well. Like we, if we're looking to blame, we're gonna, we're not gonna find. If we're, looking this way, we're not gonna find. We have to focus in on what we actually want to see and to understand.
And to your point, I did, listen, I may have had irritations, but that could be just me. I did.
It's okay to have irritations.
No, but I do get the cycle of you know, I think she definitely was using, you know, the naturalist world as a microcosm of God's universe. I mean, I could get that. And, you know, that there is ruthlessness and pain and, you know, I mean, that scene where the praying mantis is killing something,
Yeah.
something is eating something.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, okay, so that is life, you
Right.
know.
Yeah.
You can shrink it down or expand it.
Yeah.
It's like now, not to lose my train of thought, it was interesting to me that light is a metaphor for her.
Everywhere. Yeah.
Everywhere.
Yeah.
Light on the stream or light on the mountains.
Yeah.
You know, that light travels, and I was watching the pattern of clouds on the mountains and how, like, this is art, but it moves. You know,
It's always changing.
it's always, it's there for a minute and then it goes. Do you feel, I mean, I haven't actually gotten to the very end yet, that there are conclusions drawn, or is it just
There are conclusions drawn for her, right? So this is her journey. This is a year's journey, right? So, and she's trying to figure this all out. At the end, she does come to her own conclusions about the violent nature of this world. And her point, I don't know, should I give it away? Should I make it read the end of the book? Should I make it read the end of the book? What about you people on live streaming? Are we cheating?
No, I could have gone to the end, but.
No, you could have.
Take the earphones out.
But okay, so before we kind of go to the end, I think following her process is really interesting. And you're right about the light. So I don't know if you've all reached the part where she's driving and the mountain transforms in the sunset in front of her, right, kind of thing. And she does have these moments where she's looking at the tree and suddenly she sees what she believes to be each cell of the leaves transforming into a piece of light, right?
Yeah.
And that's that metaphor back between light and darkness, that they're constantly at play with each other. You have to have one if you're going to have the other. You
Is that
have
good?
to have
Is that
good.
good
You're going to have evil. You know, you have to. If you're in the dark, you have to, get yourself to the light. If you're in the light, you have to recognize that there's darkness in the world too, right? So being blind to any one of those is, she feels gives you an incomplete, kind of an incomplete life.
Right.
And so that's why she keeps drawing all these gross nature metaphors with animals, because it's, life is violent and cruel and unfair. And so what she comes to towards the end is that's not even the question you should be asking. The question isn't, how can God allow suffering? Is life good or evil? Because it just is. This is what life is. And this, the praying mantis is, attacking the other one is doing it in order to survive, right? The water bug sucks the life out of the frog because that's what he needs to live. And so it's where it's violent to one, it's life-giving to the other. And it's the observer who calls it violent or not. And so for our lives, when bad things happen, to us, it's up to us. How are we going to define that? And the church school. So just this morning, I read that, talking to the kids about, this whole thing. It's just this morning, I read, well, yesterday or a couple days ago, Disney World and Disneyland shut down, right? They're shut down. So I was talking to them about that.
Disney
right?
World, it does not embrace the whole. They embrace a slice of it. Go ahead. I just think that's ironic, right? A little bit with Disney World and Disneyland. When we're talking about embracing the whole and the nasty parts as well and stuff.
Oh, yeah. No, yeah, right.
The epitome.
I don't know. Disney's
The
pretty
epitome
violent.
does not. Well, it's true.
I would say Disney embraces the dark as well as in general. But
movies do.
yeah, Disney movies. But so Disney World and Disneyland shut down, right? And so you think, whoa, that's millions and tons of millions of dollars and stuff. And then I read this morning that they they have all this food on site and they have no idea when they're gonna reopen, so they're donating it all to food banks and to homeless shelters and things to feed people. And I was like, that's the way you take.
Yep.
You could be
There's the
wallowing
silver
in your
lining.
offices about the major loss you're gonna have, or you can see that you have opportunity to help, and that's what our lives are about. That really is what our lives, and I think what she comes down to in the end, simplistically, is that's where happiness derives from, when you look, not the way you expect or whatever, when you take the blinders off and see that there's more out there and around you. Embrace the bad, but don't live in it,
And maybe also surrender to the mystery of,
Yeah.
because, life is there's so much to know, right? And in
Yeah.
one lifetime, as she drills down on all the nature stuff. I mean, I like what you said before, Laura, about our own biases and how we perceive things through our own lens, and how that lens almost automatically has judgments or preconceived notions of almost everything we perceive. And part of my journey is to try to, knock that out or diminish it in some way, because it doesn't, it's my stuff. It's not what's real, because the real thing is much more complicated, and there's so much more I don't know. And I'm still trying to work and grapple with that, if that makes sense. I'm trying to extrapolate.
And that's the fun thing about reading people's spiritual journeys. Like, this is her journey. These are her musings and her conclusions at the end, right? But that's not going to fit to you. And, we can read it and go, oh, that's irritating or frustrating or beautiful, or, I agree, I disagree kind of thing. But what she's encouraging is go on your own journey and do it with your eyes wide open. And make sure you're asking the right questions. So, which is back to that beginning question of, why does God allow suffering? She gets into a little later, I don't know if anyone's finished, but a little later she gets into the whole theme of sacrifice. And she's like, that, whoever came up with the concept that God wants us to sacrifice animals because that makes God happy, like, what kind of God is that? And how does humanity, warp and get confused about, what God wants, and what kind of God would want that, the senseless, useless killing of whatever. So it's interesting to.
I also think, like, pastorally, right, it raises some great issues of, is love, is spirituality, is our faith without irritation? It's like you said, so I was irritated. Or is irritation part of it? Actually, should irritation be part of it? Should discomfort be part of it? Should naming the horror and not just, kind of skimming the surface, but just really, really understanding and not embracing, welcoming it. But, part of our, I would say part of our spiritual journey is to push ourselves to kind of see what God sees, which is all of it, right? To feel what God feels, which is all of it. And by doing that, to be able to be present. And I think about, I was actually talking with somebody who is very close to both of us, where there's a person who is going through a very, very difficult, really difficult challenge recently, who's crying, and the family in the midst of it is just kind of diverting attention and stuff, which happens all the time. I mean, it happens with I'm in a hospital room and somebody's dying and people are talking about the weather. I mean, here's this most important thing in life that's taking place. And because we're uncomfortable with these things ourselves, we then, try to, cheer the other person up and so forth, and how much more valuable it is to just be able to be present, because we've dealt with these things, we've dealt with the discomforts and stuff. And so now we're a safe zone for the other person. It's not like, the sadness and the tears and the discomfort and the questions and grappling and stuff. It's not like that isn't happening with another person. I mean, we know all the stuff that's going on in our minds and our souls, and a lot of it's really not easy. But if we're around people who are always pushing it off because, because it's uncomfortable for them, what does that do to us? It makes us even more isolated, even feeling more alone, because nobody's willing to go to those uncomfortable places that are in our minds and that are in our souls. And so, pastorally speaking, it's a really interesting question to, when somebody says, hey, I was really irritated by that too, instead of going, oh, that's, you shouldn't be irritated, this is a beautiful thing. It's like, really? Okay, let's dive in there. How about the irritation? How about the anger? How about the sense of disappointment? How about, all of these things, and then be able to come together.
And that's so important, because I think, it's not that it's easy to witness somebody at their most vulnerable. You as ministers, the work I do, psychiatry, when people are really hurting, that can be a really hard thing to see, when they're really at their worst, and it's not the norm that their loved ones are used to or want, so it's uncomfortable. And then that tendency to kind of get in there and paper it over and put up these walls is very human. But with grief, with people in terrible grief, it's not what you say to them, it's just being with them.
Right.
And just tolerating their crying or their wailing, or just swearing, whatever it is, because that's part of the whole journey.
Yeah.
And that's that ugliness of nature. So again, it kind of links back to the Annie Dillard book, because that is the totality, and Christ was there, people, in that way, I think, right? I mean, that's where he was meeting people to heal them.
Again, I didn't quite get this finished, but I sort of see myself that, or maybe this is my personal feeling that, God creates discomfort in difficult situations because it's a natural way to grow. That if you can cope with that, and somehow work through it, that soul growth can come out of that. Okay, so that's for the humans, in the animal and insect community. I don't know what parallel can be made, but there it is, that they also have discomfort and difficulty.
I'm not sure that God creates the suffering, but I think God allows the suffering. And I think that's the difference. I think that nature, human nature or animal nature, it's just a byproduct of living
That it's going to happen.
That it's going to happen. That bad things